He would multiply power. And so he said to me, I need the synergy of the ages. He created a law that says, if you will work together, I will multiply power. One could chase 1,000, 2, 10,000. If you'll come together and work together in prayer, I'll multiply power. He doesn't want you doing it by yourself. He wants you to work together. Because anytime we come together in unity and start doing something, he multiplies power. And I knew that in prayer, but it had never, ever in my life occurred to me that not only could I agree in prayer with the person sitting next to me, I could agree in prayer with the generation behind me. Thank you. Thank you. And this section right here that stood, thank you so much. The rest of you, I know you love me. You just, some of you don't even know who is he. It's so good to be back. This is my third service with Bethany. I've been here a couple of different times, but I have gleaned, believe me, over the years, much from this ministry, and have such profound respect for the Stockstill family and appreciation for, I'm not impressed with size, by the way. I'm impressed when I see somebody keep the standard where it's supposed to be and have their hearts in the right places, and you know, their missions, vision, everything about it. I just appreciate being here. And I'm so excited to be speaking to the other campuses as well, and the web and the TV, and all of you, welcome. I'm glad to be sharing with you also. Really excited about the message that I'm bringing to you today, because it's really who I am, has to do with prayer, and it's this particular message is really who I am right now. It started in 2000. God did something interesting with me. He put me on a 13-year prophetic journey. He started showing me some things in 2000, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. And I preached it for a while and walked that revelation out for about 5 years. And then it wasn't long before he gave me another piece of it through a dream. And then I realized, wait a minute, that's connected to this. And I'd walk that out for 6 years, and then he gave me another piece of it. And I realized this has all been a prophetic journey for this nation, for a message he wants me to bring. And I'm going to share that with you today. In 2000, I was speaking at the Bible college that I had attended back in the 70s, back when I was 5 years old. And, you know, the school had lost just a little bit of its, strength. Not bad, just the way things ebb and flow in ministries and life, and you just need another sort of surge. And I was just praying, saying, Lord, reopen all of these wells that the founder, Gordon Lindsay, put in this place. And, the signs and the wonders and the gifts of the Spirit and all the power and just everything, Lord. Get it back. And I felt like the Lord spoke to me and said, well, why don't you take your session this morning and instead of teaching, lead the student body in an hour. There's about 1,000, maybe 1,200 students at the time. Just lead in an hour of prayer for this. So that's what we were doing. I kept the worship team up, and we had the harp and bowl thing going, the worship and intercession, and pray a little worship, pray, worship. And early in the prayer time, the Lord spoke to me, and I really didn't believe it was the Lord at first. Actually, I thought it was heresy. He spoke to me, and I heard him say, well, I need for you now to agree in prayer with Gordon Lindsay. He was the founder. And I had this, the worship team's going, and I'm just doing this, and I'm trying to think this through, and I said to the Lord, I said to myself, this can't be God, because I said, he's been dead for 30 years. And we're not supposed to try to communicate with the dead. I can't agree in prayer with him. And then I had one of these duh moments. And I thought, why have I never had this thought before? Because I heard immediately, well, his prayers aren't dead. And the Lord's talking to me, saying, they're still on record in heaven. They're still alive. And you know exactly what he wanted. You know who he was. You know what he stood for. You know the family. You've traveled with him. You've read all the books. You've heard the messages. You know what he asked me to do. Get in agreement. And then I heard the Lord say, because until this generation comes into agreement with what I promised him, I can't do for him what he asked me to do, what I promised him I would do. And that really messed with me because the Lord didn't say I won't. He said I can't. And then, you know, I'm up trying to lead this prayer meeting, and I'm just giving this signal to the worship team. They think I'm really in the worship. I'm stalling for time trying to figure all this out. And the Lord took me in my thinking at that moment to Hebrews chapter 11, which is the great faith chapter. Talks about all the great heroes of faith, and then it segues into chapter 12 and talks about now they are the great cloud of witnesses. But when you get to the end of that chapter, he says something strange. He says all these people, even though they were great people of faith and accomplished all these great things, they didn't receive the fullness of what I promised them. Then he says, because I wouldn't let them be perfect without you. Some translations say perfect. The word doesn't mean flawless. The word actually means, in Greek, complete. I wouldn't let them be complete without the next generation and the next generation. One translation and one definition of the word, this is a really good translation, it would be finish. I was not willing to finish through them what I started without the next generation. Another great definition of the word, I love this definition, means to bring something to its intended goal. He said, that which I started and intended to do through this person, I wasn't willing to finish without the next generation. And God started messing with me, and right there on the platform, I started having this epiphany. And I realized how connected the generations were. I realized God will tell a person something and say, I'm going to do this through you, knowing he's not going to finish it for 100 years. He's going to do it through them, through their children or their grandchildren or their spiritual children. And he doesn't always say, by the way, it's going to be 400 years, Abraham, before I do all this. He says, I'm going to do this, and this. It was way down the road when he told him, by the way, it'll be 400 years. Because he doesn't see the disconnect that we see generationally and through the bloodline. When he does it for this person, through this person, as far as he's concerned, he's doing it through this person. In fact, he said, this generation paid tithe through this generation. They're being blessed because of what this one did. They paid tithes through them. So he started talking to me about the continuity of the ages and how important it is that we connect and honor and grab hold of that. And he won't let us go forward sometimes until we reach backward. And for me, he really sent me on a 5-year journey, as I said earlier, walking this out. Because the word was not, as it turns out, the word wasn't primarily for Christ for the nations. He was teaching me something that was going to be significant for our nation. So then he made me dig into our history. He led me to all the states. I've been to all the states multiple times. I've been to Washington, D.C. many times. Because he said to me, I want you to become acquainted with this nation, not just because of history, but I want you're going to have to find out what I wanted. And you're going to have to find out what I was doing. And even when Satan interrupted with some of the hideous things and bad things that have happened, you need to understand, what was I doing? Amen. And I walked that revelation and preached that message for several years. But at the end of that prayer time, after he said, you need to agree in prayer with him, and then he said, I can't do it until you do, then he said this to me, and this rocked my world, as I'd never heard this before. He said, I need the synergy of the ages. Well, I'm just keep going, worship. I'm really kind of now trying to figure this out. I knew what synergy was I love the concept of synergy. Every time I preach this message, it blows me away when I think about synergy, because synergy is this law that God created that's really almost impossible, as far as I'm concerned, to explain and understand, but it basically says if you work together with someone, there won't be an addition of power, there'll be a multiplying of power. Now, if I can lift 100 pounds and you can lift 100 pounds, and we work separately on different endeavors or loads, we'll lift a total of 200 pounds. But if we will work together on one load, synergy kicks in and we'll lift 300 pounds. God is so into unity, connection, relationship, body life, family. He is so into that He created a law that says, if you will work together, I will multiply power. Well, I understood synergy, and I understood synergy in prayer because I taught on prayer, and I love to talk about the prayer of agreement. If you agree in prayer, He says, one could chase 1,000, 2, 10,000. If you'll come together and work together in prayer, I'll multiply power. He doesn't want you doing it by yourself. He wants you to work together. Isn't one church serving the city with 3,500 people? He wants 10,000 people serving the city, because it'll be more than 10,000. It'll be multiplied, because anytime we come together in unity and start doing something, He multiplies power. And I knew that in prayer, but it had never, ever in my life occurred to me that not only could I agree in prayer with the person sitting next to me, I could agree in prayer with the generation behind me. Or that at whatever level, in whatever we were doing, if we would agree, He would multiply power. And so He said to me, I need the synergy of the ages. And if you connect with what I gave Him to do, I'll multiply power for you today. So I walked that principle out. I preached it for 5 years and 5 or 6 years, and just all over the country tried to honor what the founders did, honor what they did in the 1800s, honor what they did 50 years ago, honor Billy Graham and the revivals of the 40s and the 50s, and say, Lord, now let us agree with that so we can get a multiplied power awakening. Amen. Then in 2007, another phase of this came to me. I was ministering with my friend Lou Engle, and he's the leader of the call. He's another prayer leader in America. Most of you probably know who Lou is. And when we were getting ready to go to our rooms at the end of a service, his assistant was with him, and I knew his assistant was a dreamer. Oftentimes God would give him dreams. And in jest, before I went to my room, I looked at him and I said, hey, Thomas, ask God to give you a dream for me tonight. And he knew I was kidding around. He said, okay. First thing he said to me the next morning was, hey, Dutch, God gave me a dream for you last night. And my first thought was, I wish it was always this easy. I need a word from God, get a dream tonight, let me know in the morning what He says, But he said, in the dream, you were a boxer. Not the dog, but the athlete. You knew that just looking at me, didn't you? I'm trying to. Okay, forget it. And he said, you boxed 5 giants, and you knocked out all 5 giants. And you knocked each one out with 1 punch. And you did it 1 giant per round for 5 rounds. And you alternated fists. So round 1, a giant stepped in the ring, you took him out. Round 2, another one stepped in the ring, other fist, 1 punch, you took him out. Round 3, 4, 5. 5 giants, 5 rounds, 5 punches, alternating fists. And then I walked up to him in the dream, held up my 2 fists and said, if you're going to take out the giants in this season, you're going to have to wear these 2 gloves. And one said Everlast, and one said Evergreen. End of dream. And I knew this was an important dream. I knew it was a word for the nation and my role in the nation. I knew that God was saying He was going to help us take out some spiritual giants. I knew that if we got the right revelation, if we would wear the right gloves, it wouldn't be hard. one punch. I knew I had to receive revelation from the Lord about what are these giants. What are these gloves? I felt like I knew immediately what the everlast was all about because I had been studying the life of Abraham. And God had captivated me with Genesis 21:33. It says, Abraham called on the everlasting God, Olam El. And it's the first time that name is mentioned, which is significant in Scripture. Anytime you find the name of God or an important subject mentioned for the first time, God introduces the subject. He shares things about it that will be significant, important, consistent through Scripture. So if you'll study the passage and the context, you'll learn some things that are very significant. And especially with the names of God, you can do that. Why did he share it here, and what was he trying to say to us about himself? And so I was fascinated. I found myself wondering why, when Abraham was calling on him, why wasn't Yahweh enough? He didn't call on Yahweh. That revelation wasn't what he was looking for. He didn't call on Adonai or El Shaddai. And then I'm thinking, now, why was it about Abraham, and what was he experiencing that caused him to feel like, no, that's not adequate. That's not who I'm trying to describe. I need another name. And finally says, it's Olam. It's Olam El. Well, Olam means eternal. And when we think of eternal, we're usually thinking about the future. But when you study this word, you find it's not just the most distant times this way, it's both ways. It's the yesterday, today, and forever. He's all the same, the I am, who's outside of time. And one lexicon said the most distant times both ways. And that's a pretty good definition, except anytime you use the word time to describe it, you just violated Olam. Because you can't use the word time to define it. It's the God outside of time who is the eternal God. One verse says he inhabits eternity. Figure that out. So Abraham has just come through 25 difficult years. He received a promise from God. I'm going to do this and this and this through him. I'm going to give you land, going to give you a son, going to give you a nation through that son, and then I'm going to bless the whole world through that nation, Messiah. But it didn't turn out the way Abraham thought it would, and Isaac didn't come along quickly. And even though Abraham became a great man of faith, and the New Testament says, refers to him as a father of faith and an unwavering man of faith, he was not that at the beginning. He became a great man of faith. That should encourage you. He wavered along the way until the end. Then he became steadfast. But he wavered so much that at one point, he and Sarah finally decided, she said, well, we're getting up in years, and I've been barren all my life. I can't have kids, and this is just not going to happen. So they connived a plan of, why don't we just see if we can get your maid pregnant and have a son through her, and maybe God will allow that to be the heir and give us the nation. And we don't like to talk about that, but that really happened, and actually we're still dealing with the ramifications of that decision today, aren't we? And Ishmael was born, and now the difficulties that have come. When God came to them the final time, a year before Isaac was born, and said, you're going to have a son next year, Abraham was 99. Makes me tired just thinking about it. Abraham was 99 and she was 90, and they both laughed at God. Not a laugh of joy, but a laugh of cynicism. It was basically just, I'm 99, she's 90, I don't want to hear about this anymore. We don't even do those things anymore. And God said, yeah, but you're going to. And in 3 months, between that moment and conception, the Lord did something in them to break off the last of the unbelief. And they became unwavering in their faith, the New Testament says, and they received strength or dunamis to conceive. Not only did Abraham waver in his faith for a season, he did some other pretty despicable things. I don't know if the unbelief I wouldn't call despicable, but he did some despicable things. Because in the younger years when Sarah was beautiful, in their nomadic life, they moved to a new region. And he said, this king over here may want you to be a part of his harem. And they might even kill me to get you, so let's just tell them you're my sister and they can have you if this happens. Does that make you feel secure, ladies? Better I live and give you away than die trying to protect your honor. Abraham did that twice. Let's just be honest. That's lying and it's covenant breaking. No, I'm not dissing Abraham, because he became a covenant keeper. He became an unwavering man of faith, and he became one that God said, he's my friend. Because God did not call Abraham based on who Abraham was, and he didn't call Abraham based on what Abraham could do. He called Abraham based on who he was and what he knew he could do with a man with all these weaknesses and failures. And I'm the eternal God, and I see the end from the beginning. And even though I know what's in you now, I know what I'm going to put in you. And in 25 years, I'm going to be able to do this through you. And Abraham is through this now, and Isaac is here, and he's looking back and he's marveling at God, and he's saying, way back in the beginning, you knew my flaws, but you knew what you were going to do with me. And you can reach back and heal my past, and you can look into my future. You're the God outside of time. How did you do this when I was unfaithful? You remained faithful. When I tried to give her away, you made sure the king didn't sleep with her. And he's just overwhelmed. He says, You're the eternal God outside of time that reaches into time and helps me. And God said to me, for this nation, if you're going to take out giants and if you're going to be able to believe that I'm going to send a revival and an awakening that turns this nation, you're going to have to believe that I'm Olam. You're going to have to believe that I'm bigger than your weaknesses and bigger than your sins. People come to me and say, God can't bless America anymore. He can't pour out his spirit on America. We're too bad. We're too evil. There's been too much sin. And I always say the same thing. Do you really think I'm asking for this based upon our merits? I'm asking based on the blood of Jesus and the mercy of God and his purposes, not what we want, but what he wants to do around the world. It's all about Olam, not about us. It's about what he can do to transform, not about who we are in our weak state. So I feel like God has given me this glove. I know he can do it. He's bigger than our failures. He's bigger than the covenants we broke with the native people. He's bigger than slavery. He's bigger than abortion. He's bigger than human trafficking. He's bigger than idolatry. He's bigger than drug abuse. He's bigger than the divides we've built politically. He can do this thing. And way back when he raised us up, he knew we would fail, but he knew that he was bigger than those failures, and I'll get them there. Come on. But I could not get evergreen. I walked that revelation of everlasting God for about 6 years. I prayed about it, I thought about it, I studied it. I'm so brilliant that I thought it must have something to do with a tree. I just couldn't get it. And I finally just put it on the shelf. I said, Lord, one of these days you'll show me this revelation about the other glove. 2013, 6 years later, I'm back at the Synergy of the Ages place, Christ for the Nations. Now I'm director. Significant that I was back in this place. Commencement, graduation. I decided to bring in not a preacher to give the message, but a soldier. I wanted the students to know you don't have to do what I do to be called of God and used by God. You can be called into government or the military or medicine. Or you'd be called to be just a mom and dad. And whatever he calls you to do it with honor and do it with integrity and understand sacrifice. And this soldier's a spiritual son of mine. He served with the Special Forces. He's actually a JAG attorney, but he went through all the training with the Special Forces because he decided, I don't want to just be alongside of them just because I'm an attorney. I want to earn the right to be alongside of them on the battlefield. So he went through all the training. He came to me once and said, Papa Dutch, I love you, but I could kill you in 6 seconds. And so I stopped calling him son and started calling him sir. But we brought him in to do the commencement message, and he did a great job. But at the end of his message, he turned to me and he said, Papa Dutch, that's what he calls me. He said, Papa Dutch, I feel like the Lord wants me to give you a gift. And I didn't think I really liked that because I felt like it was pulling the focus off the graduates and onto me. And I thought, well, I'm not going to stop him. He could kill me in 6 seconds. So. But I thought, trust him and just let him do it. And, it just would have been awkward to just say no. So he said, I have a flag for you. He said, most people have never seen this flag, and I had never seen this flag. He said, I need to tell you a little about it first, because he's a lover of history. He said, this flag was used in America before we ever had the Stars and Stripes. We didn't have a formal flag yet, and for a while, this was basically our flag, although it was never formalized. George Washington had it made, and he flew it over all of the naval ships, and then it spread in its popularity, and when it flew over all the colonies and the battlefields. And he said, this flag has across the top, appeal to heaven, or an appeal to heaven. And they put appeal to heaven on it because of the writings of a man named John Locke, who was a great influencer of our founders. And he wrote a series of papers in which he said, when you've done everything you know to do to get victory or breakthrough or what you need and you can't do it, there's still something you can do. You can appeal to heaven. And our founders grabbed that, actually put it in the Constitution. We appeal to the in the Declaration of Independence. But they grabbed that phrase, appeal to heaven, because they knew there was no way we could overthrow the yoke of Britain, the greatest empire in the world, with no army and no money and no weapons. It was laughable to think we could gain independence unless God was in this. And if God was in it, he would help us. So they flew the flag, appeal to heaven. Did you know our nation was born under a prayer movement? They didn't tell you that in school, did they? The whole theme. Yeah, we're going to have to fight. Yeah, we're going to have to, some of us may die, but that's not going to turn the tide. We're going to win or lose based on whether or not he comes through for us. We appeal to heaven. I was deeply impacted by that. And then he said, and they put an evergreen tree on this flag. And when he said this, he unfolded it and held it up in the ceremony. And when he turned to me and I saw the evergreen tree, I felt the presence of God and the glory of God just envelop me. I thought I was going to fall out in my cap and gown. I looked at my wife and I said, I think I'm about to get the other glove. He said, they put an evergreen tree on here because the evergreen tree stands for eternal covenant. The Iroquois, and this is all documented, by the way, and footnoted in this little book. I put all this in a small book, easy read, so the guys would read it too. Called Appeal to Heaven. Documented, footnoted. The Iroquois were great influencers of our founders and their government and their way of thinking. And they believed that the evergreen tree stood for eternal covenant, so much so that when they formed the Iroquois Confederacy with other tribes, they went with different representatives from each tribe to a giant evergreen tree, dug holes in the ground there, buried their weapons there, saying to one another, I will never fight you. I will always walk in covenant and peace with you. And that's where we get the phrase today, bury the hatchet. So our founders put this evergreen on here, and God said to me, he said, look, if you're going to take out the giants, you're going to have to appeal to me based on covenant. What does that mean? That means you can't just ask me to save America because you want to prosper. You can't just ask me to heal America so your grandchildren and grandchildren can keep living a carnal American dream of things. Because we took God's dream for America and turned it into the American dream, which is all about stuff. He said, you can't ask me just because you want to be the most powerful nation in the world and the richest nation in the world. You're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back and find out, what was I doing? And what do I want? And what is my dream? And you're going to ask based on covenant. Then I found out, I kept wondering, why is this flag turning up all over the world? Because when he introduced it in 2013, we started talking about it, and the next thing you know, it's everywhere. The cover on the book is a picture of a young man at the top of the Himalayan mountains, highest point he can get, and there are all the Buddhist prayer flags there. The people have crawled up and hung, and here's a young man standing with the Appeal to Heaven flag over all the other flags. And it started turning up in Asia and Cambodia and all over the world. And I said, God, this American, what is he? He said, no, this is a kingdom flag. And then he showed me, he said, the concept of covenant, the evergreen picture in covenant didn't just go back to the Iroquois. It goes all the way back to Abraham. And in the verse in Genesis 21:33, where he called on before he called on Olam, everlasting God, he planted a tree. And I knew he planted a tree. I'd read it dozens of times. I just didn't know a tamarisk tree was an evergreen tree. He planted an evergreen and called on everlast. He wore both gloves. The tamarisk tree, the articles I read said it's a slow growing evergreen. In fact, he said no one would ever plant a tamarisk tree for his or herself, because they would know, I will never reap the benefit of this tree. It grows so slow, it lives a long time, hundreds of years. But I'll never reap the benefit. He said they would only plant it for their children and their children's children and children. He said when Abraham planted the covenant tree, what he was saying was to his children and his children's children, you will sit under the shade of my covenant with God. And God said, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to reach back to my original purposes and stand and cry out to me based on covenant, not based on just what you want. As I processed all this, 1 month later, after I was given this flag, another friend of mine had a dream about me and our nation. This dream is so detailed and so amazing, I take one whole chapter just to talk about it. It takes him 45 minutes to do it. I'll do it. I'm going to do it in 2. He found himself in a large auditorium, old auditorium, of seat maybe 25, 30,000 people. It was dark. He couldn't find the lights. A man walked up to him and said, let me show you around, flipped on light switches, opened windows all the way around, just old piece of plywood on hinges, propped it open. And now it's full of light. He can see this place is huge. The man brings him to the platform, sits him in a chair and said, I want to show you some things. He says, look out these windows over here. And as he looked out the windows, he saw ships coming. And he said, those look like pilgrim ships. And sure enough, they were. And 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pilgrims docked and did a processional into the auditorium and began to worship. And then the man said, look out these windows. This is all taking in the dream. He said, an hour or so for each group. He looks out these windows and he said, those look like pioneers. And sure enough, here come the covered wagons and the ladies in their bonnets and long dresses and the men on horses and walking. They come in, another 3,000 or 4,000, and the previous generation is cheering them. It's like the great cloud of witnesses, saying, thank you for keeping the dream alive. Thank you for the price you paid. And then when they got into the room, they all began to worship together. And then another generation, and the man said, these are the builders, the planters, built the railroads. And then they came in the worship, and then a fourth generation came, 5, 6. And now there's like 25,000 people in worshiping, different generations. And then he says, look over here, and sure enough, here come the automobiles and the trucks, and our generation came in. And now there's 7 generations worshiping. And then the man said, watch these doors right here. And he looked through those doors, and a representative from the Pilgrims came and walked up on this bridge that went over the platform. When he got to the middle of the bridge, he stopped. He said, for about 10 minutes, this pilgrim prophesied God's purposes and plans for America. And then he went, took a seat, and sure enough, the door opened, and one of the pioneers came and did the same thing and stopped. And for about 10 minutes, and after they would finish, he said the roar of praise that would go up from all these generations was so great, I thought the building would collapse. 6 generations did that. It's time for us. The man walks up to him, and don't miss what I'm about to say to you now. And when he said it, I said, have you ever heard this phrase before? And he said, never in my life. Never heard you talk about it, preach on it. The man looked at him and said, are you ready to take your place in the synergy of the ages? And he said, in the dream, yes, sir, I am. He said, go get in line, because in our generation group, it wasn't one person that came out, it was an entourage. Billy Graham, other leaders came out through the doors, took a seat. And then he said, Dutch, you were the last one to come out. And I was speechless listening to this. And he said, you walked up on the bridge to prophesy, but I had noticed you were carrying something and nobody else had anything. And I kept wondering in the dream, what does he have? And he said, you started unfolding a white flag. Now, I'd never seen it till a month before this. He had never seen it when he had the dream. He had to just Google and look for something like this. He said, you started unfolding a white flag, and I stopped him, and I said, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, did it by any chance say appeal to heaven? And he said, how did you know that? And I was just in shock, and I said, did it by any chance have an evergreen on it? He said, how did you know that? And I walked over to my briefcase and grabbed this flag and unfolded it and said, because I have one. He said, where'd you get that? I told him my story. He pulled his out and said, I found this online. I bought it. And he said, you didn't prophesy right away like the others. So for about 10 or 15 minutes, all you did was unfold the flag, and you started waving it over the people in a figure 8, which is the symbol of eternity or eternal covenant. And he said, the praise was so loud, again, I didn't think the building would survive. And then after about 10 minutes, you stopped and you prophesied. And the last thing you said was, America is returning to the ancient path to reap the harvest of the ages.